Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan and welcome to Words in Time. Now in today's video we have 6 books, 6 reviews, no time to waste, let's get into them. Alright, so I'm going to give you a quick premise, some likes, some dislikes, and a score out of 10, purely based on my own personal enjoyment. So let's kick things off with Nemesis Games, the 5th book in the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. So I won't give you too much of a premise for this one because I don't want to reveal anything that happened in the first 4 books, but as always we'll be following the crew of the Rocinante and we'll also be finding out what's going on when it comes to Earth, Mars, the Belters, and all of the interesting dynamics going on between them. So some of the things that I liked about Nemesis Games, I'm going to start with the POVs. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but The Expanse kind of rotates, introduces new POVs, and I think these are going to be some fan favorites, definitely ones that I enjoyed reading. My next like is that I felt like this was probably the best book in terms of character development for me when it comes to The Expanse so far, because I've always liked the crew of the Rocinante, but I don't think I've felt a deep love or really cared for them so far. And in this book, characters kind of beyond Holden, who we already know pretty well, I really started to develop a bit of an affinity for, and I'm quite connected to going forward throughout the rest of the series. I also thought that this book did introduce something that I think kind of upped the stakes for the series. It was quite an interesting moment, did have interesting repercussions, so I liked some of the swings they took with Nemesis Games. Now, when it comes to my dislikes, there wasn't anything too major. I would say that something that I was kind of looking forward to after Abaddon's Gate Book 3 was it kind of introduced some new sci-fi concepts. I thought they were kind of interesting, a bit more ambitious, and I was kind of excited to see what that would build to. And so far, it hasn't really paid off. It still feels fairly similar to how the series did early on. And I'm not saying it won't. I haven't read them yet. I'm up to book 6, just reading that now. So we'll see. We'll see whether those things pay off for me. And another kind of minor dislike was the antagonist. I don't think the antagonists / villains in the Expanse series are typically the highlight of the series. They did have fairly well understood motivations, but I'm not sure how interesting or deep they were, and I'm not sure it was a super engaging or charismatic or anything like that kind of antagonist. But we'll see. We'll see going forward. Not too many major complaints from me. I'm going to give Nemesis Games an 8 out of 10. So enjoyed the book. This is probably my second favorite in the series so far. Book 1, still my favorite, but yes, enjoying the series. So check out The Expanse and some of my reviews from the earlier books if you're interested. Up next, we have The Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe, the first book in the Book of the New Sun. So the premise for this one is that we follow Severian, an apprentice torturer that does something that torturers are not supposed to do, and that is show mercy. And things only get more weird and complicated from there. So something that I liked about the book was that it had a very distinct feel and tone, and I enjoyed learning about the world, although it wasn't exactly always clear when and where we were and what was happening. I did enjoy kind of slowly piecing things together, and it wasn't quite as hard to read as I expected, at least in terms of the prose. I found that I was able to follow the sentences, although figuring out exactly what the sentences mean is another story. So if that's a little bit confusing, you'll have to read the book and find out. It's a lot of fun seeing people kind of discuss theories and things about this book. Something else that I liked about it was that it felt very ambitious. I could tell, even though this was only book 1, that it was kind of setting up some kind of weird and interesting concepts that didn't necessarily pay off in this book, but I think could lead to some interesting reveals down the road. So when it comes to some dislikes, I expected this to be dark. The book is called The Shadow of the Torturer after all, but I didn't expect it to be as creepy. There were several scenes that made me feel quite uncomfortable and I did not particularly enjoy reading. And that kind of connects to my second dislike, is that I didn't enjoy the character of Severian. I thought quite a lot of his behavior and attitudes were really off-putting, and I didn't enjoy reading the character of Severian. Now, I don't have to like characters to like a book, and I think if he was not the main character, or perhaps if even this was just written in the third person, it wouldn't have been as much of an issue for me. But seeing as this is written in the first person POV and you have to spend the whole book in the mind of this character that I personally just really didn't enjoy, it did make it a bit of a struggle. So I don't think I'm going to give a score for this one, and the reason for that is I've seen people debating online, is this book 1 of 4 in the series, or really is the whole series just one book that has been split into 4 parts? Having read the first book, I would agree with the second side of that argument. I think it's hard to judge just reading this one by itself. It definitely feels like a small part of a larger work. But if you want to know my kind of rough overall enjoyment of the book, so far, I'm not currently interested in reading the rest of the book/series. I can see that it's very ambitious and I can see what the appeal to a lot of people, but personally, it just didn't work for me. Up next, and I'm going to do these two together, we have The Dark Forest and Death's End, books 2 and 3 of the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy by Cixin Liu. So I'll talk about these quickly, but if you want to hear more, I have a full review for the first book, The Three Body Problem, and I also talked with my friend Baron from Your Brain on Books about the whole series. So, the premise for the first book is that strange things start happening to prominent scientists, and it might be linked to this secret mission that is sending messages out into space. So, these two books deal with the consequences of that, and things really just escalate, and this is a mind-blowing series. So spoiler alert, I'm a pretty big fan. So let's get into some of my likes. Well, I think the plot was more engaging and the pacing was much better. Especially The Dark Forest, the amount of cool ideas that you could have based the whole book off that Cixin Liu explored within the one novel was just absolutely awesome to me. I also thought that there was a step up in the character writing. It's still not a main focus of the series, still not a main strength, but there were a few interesting characters in The Dark Forest, and one in particular that you kind of go on a journey with in Death's End, which I think was a little bit more emotional and impactful than anything that happened in the first book. The sci-fi concepts also just get nuttier and nuttier. There's some really cool stuff that happens in Dark Forest, and then Death's End absolutely made my brain bleed. It was completely bonkers. Trying to wrap my head around some of the concepts felt like my brain had been pulled apart and then put back together and was just absolute jelly afterwards. So if you like hard sci-fi, if you like mind-blowing concepts, I think this is going to be a series for you. So did I have any dislikes? Not particularly. I know there is one character in The Dark Forest which some people find annoying. I didn't think we were supposed to like that character. I thought they were very flawed, but they were still interesting to me. So that didn't negatively affect my reading experience. And the Death's End, while never a slog, was a little bit slower than The Dark Forest. It didn't quite maintain the pacing from book 2. But overall, absolutely loved them. I'm going to give them a 9.5 and a 9 out of 10. Highly, highly recommend this trilogy. Moving on, we have Percivious Insomnia, which was co-written by JJ and AJ Cook. Now, I was actually sent a copy of this book by a rep for the authors, and they didn't ask for a review, they just asked if I was interested in checking it out, which I thought was very kind of them. And I liked the premise, so I decided to give it a read. The premise for this one is that people around the world start suffering from insomnia, and it doesn't respond to typical medications. So this is kind of a medical thriller meets sci-fi story. Now, what are some of the things that I liked about it? Just a couple of quick silly things to start. This is written by a husband and wife duo, which I think is super, super cute. And this is an independently published book, and the quality is really, really high. You have a really nice kind of soft hardcover here, and I didn't see any proofreading, reading mistakes or anything like that. So high quality copy. And when it comes to the story itself, I liked the kind of the tone, the sort of sense of optimism in a way. Like, I like darker books, but within that darkness, there needs to at least be a little bit of light, a little bit of hope, something for me to hold on to. And that was provided for me in this book. And I thought it kind of picked up towards the end. I thought the ending was one of the stronger aspects of this book. When it comes to some of my dislikes, At the start of the book, I found it a little hard to get into the writing style. I thought it was a tad over-descriptive, a few too many adjectives and adverbs that made the writing not flow perhaps as smoothly as it could. Although that did get better as the book went on and we had already become introduced to many of the characters and concepts. The main problem for me with this book is that there are just too many POVs. I lost count, but I think there was somewhere around 12 to 15 POVs in a book that's only about, if we do our quick customary words in time flip through, around 250 pages. So while there was a lot going on, there wasn't enough breathing room for enough to really go on, if that makes sense. I think this book would have been better off if they just pared that down to 4 or 5 characters to really focus on, and then we would have been able to flesh things out a lot more, and I think that would have benefited the pacing and the storytelling. So that's pretty much it when it comes to Percivious Insomnia. I'm going to have to give this one a 5 out of 10. I liked where it ended. I was kind of intrigued for the next one. I'm not sure if I'll read it. I think with some changes, this could be a promising series. But for me at the moment, this one was just a little bit middle of the road, but still glad I read Percivious Insomnia. And finally, we have A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. So the premise for this one is that we are in a post-apocalyptic setting, and the story is told in 3 parts in 3 different time periods, and all of them follow this religious organization that is trying to collect and interpret relics from the past. So some of the things that I liked about this book was, one of them was it was surprisingly funny. I think the cover, while the cover is absolutely awesome, is kind of misleading. Nothing this dramatic, nothing this epic. There's not too much kind of sci-fi, fantastical, dramatic stuff going on. It's a lot more talky and it's a lot more thinky than the cover would lead you to believe. But it's also kind of absurdly funny at times. There's one character in particular that was kind of amusing, I kind of connected with and felt for. Something else that I liked about the book was that it's quite ambitious in terms of the themes it tries to tackle. There's some really heavy stuff going on here. While it's not so much focused on plot progression, there are some really kind of interesting ideas that I was percolating on for a while after I read the book and read up on. I had to go do some additional research to kind of help categorize my thoughts after I was finished reading it. Now, when it came to some of the dislikes, I will say that part 2 in particular really struggled to hold my attention. I found part 2 to be a little bit confusing and a little bit boring. And overall, all 3 parts, it lacked a little bit of pacing, it lacked a little bit of momentum for me. I know it's not that style of book, but it just needed to hook me in some other way, whether it was the characters or the ideas. There just needed to be something pulling me along, and while I was interested from time to time, I was never fully invested. And I did say that the themes were quite heavy and ambitious, but for me, I don't think it ever really landed. I don't think I ever really related or connected to the message. I did read a review that compared this to Kurt Vonnegut, a style of writing, and I kind of vaguely see the comparison because it can be quite funny at times. I wouldn't call this as a comedy though. It's like 5% of the book is funny. But it can be funny at times, and it does deal with some fairly heavy social issues. But to me, I absolutely love Kurt Vonnegut. He makes me laugh, he makes me think, and I really connect and relate to the things that he was talking about. Whereas for me, that just didn't happen in A Canticle for Leibowitz. So a score, I'm going to have to give this one a 5.5 out of 10. While I think it went for some interesting and ambitious things, it just never really worked for me, and I didn't overly enjoy reading the book after part 1. So there you go, guys. That was a little bit of a mixed bag. A couple of classics there that I was expecting to like, because you guys, if you've been following the channel, you know I love Arthur C. Clarke, you know I love Philip K. Dick, so I wanted to add those to my list of favorite classics, but they just didn't quite land for me. But let me know your thoughts on them. And the big hit for me recently has been the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. Definitely one of my favorite series, and The Dark Forest in particular is going to be pretty high up there on my list of favorite sci-fi books. So let me know your thoughts on the books, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, and you can find more sci-fi content over here.